Jamie Bennett had always considered himself remarkably ordinary. He lived in a modest apartment in Chicago, worked as a bookstore clerk in a quiet little shop tucked between a coffeehouse and a dry cleaner, and spent his weekends playing board games with friends or volunteering at a local animal shelter. His routine was as predictable as the ticking hands of the dusty old grandfather clock in the bookstore's corner. And truth be told, Jamie liked it that way. He had never dreamed of heroics or greatness. In his eyes, contentment was more than enough. Until that night. It had started like any other rainy evening. The wind rattled the windows and streetlights flickered as dark clouds rolled in from the lake. Jamie was curled up on his couch, sipping tea and rereading a worn copy of Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury when the storm intensified. Thunder cracked with such force it seemed to shatter the quiet rhythm of the city. Lightning danced across the skyline in wild arcs. Drawn by a strange sense of anticipation, Jamie stood and walked to the window, watching nature's fury unfold. And then it happened. A lightning bolt, sharper and brighter than any he had ever seen, struck the transformer just outside his building. For a split second, the world glowed an eerie blue-white, brighter than daylight. Jamie felt something surge through the glass and into his chest, a jolt so powerful that it lifted him off his feet. He crashed onto the floor, heart pounding erratically, eyes wide open, yet seeing nothing but a brilliant white void. Then, silence. Darkness. He awoke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, the storm a memory. Disoriented, Jamie sat up. Every inch of his body tingled, as if still charged by static. When he reached for his glasses on the nightstand, he realized they were in pieces on the floor. With a resigned sigh, he looked up, only to realize he could see clearly. In fact, not only clearly, but with perfect precision. He could make out the tiniest dust particles in the sunlight, the fine threads of the fabric on his couch. Colors seemed richer, sharper. His pulse quickened. He hurried to the bathroom mirror, half expecting to see someone else staring back. But it was him, same tousled brown hair, same earnest hazel eyes, same faint scar above his left eyebrow from childhood. Yet there was a glow about him, subtle but undeniable. Jamie tried to brush it off as a dream or a stress reaction. He told himself he'd call a doctor. But first, maybe a walk would help clear his mind. Dressed and out on the sidewalk, Jamie noticed things he never had before. The rhythm of traffic, the distant sound of footsteps, even the subtle scent of fresh bread from a bakery blocks away. He broke into a jog, then a run. Time seemed to bend. He darted between people, weaving through crowds with inhuman grace. He ran faster than he'd ever imagined possible, yet he didn't tire. When he finally stopped, 5 miles from his apartment, he was panting from astonishment, not exertion. The world hadn't changed. He had. Back at home, Jamie paced, trying to make sense of it. His thoughts raced. What did this mean? Was it a freak side effect from the lightning strike? Had something been unlocked inside him? He wasn't sure what scared him more, the fact that it had happened, or the fact that part of him didn't want it to go away. Jamie Bennett had gone to bed an ordinary man. He had awakened, something else. The following days were a whirlwind of disbelief and curiosity. Jamie took time off work under the excuse of a minor injury from the storm, but the truth was far more complicated. He spent every waking hour alone, pushing the boundaries of his new abilities. He began with small things. Lifting heavy boxes effortlessly, leaping up flights of stairs in seconds, reading entire novels in a blink, and remembering every word. But soon, the simple marvel of his powers gave way to a more pressing concern: what else could he do? In the abandoned school gymnasium near his apartment, Jamie practiced in secret. He tested his strength, his reflexes, even his stamina. The results were staggering. He could punch through concrete, balance on a wire like a tightrope walker, hear conversations from across the block. His mind had become a sponge, absorbing information at an astonishing rate. He learned to meditate and manipulate his breathing, slowing his heart almost at will. But not everything was perfect. With each new discovery came growing unease. He began hearing people's voices before they spoke, feeling pulses of movement he couldn't see, sensing tension in crowds like static electricity. It was thrilling, and overwhelming. One night, overwhelmed by the noise of the city, he locked himself in his bathroom and sat beneath the shower for hours, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. Jamie wasn't just faster or stronger, he was becoming something else entirely. Something more. One evening, while walking home, he noticed a mugging in progress down a narrow alley. A teenager was cornered by two masked men. Without thinking, Jamie sprinted toward them, a blur of motion. In seconds, it was over, the assailants unconscious on the ground, the boy staring up at him wide-eyed. You flew," the kid whispered. Jamie hadn't noticed. He felt no fatigue, no pain. He just nodded, told the boy to call the police, and vanished. That night, he couldn't sleep. His adrenaline was still pumping, but his thoughts were in turmoil. He had done something good, he was sure of it. But how long could he keep this hidden? What if someone had filmed him? What if the police were looking for him? He began researching. Stories of vigilantes, whistleblowers, secret experiments. Some were urban legends, others terrifyingly plausible. He read about those who had tried to change the world and were hunted, imprisoned, or worse. Jamie began to feel the weight of his abilities. This wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility. And the world? The world didn't like what it couldn't explain. He stared at his reflection, the glow in his eyes now unmistakable. "What are you going to do, Jamie?" he whispered to himself. The city buzzed outside his window, unaware of the storm that had awakened within one very ordinary man. The morning after the alley rescue, Jamie sat at the kitchen table, staring at a crumpled paper napkin covered in sketches. His mind buzzed with ideas, symbols, shapes, names. He knew it was time. If he was going to use these powers, he had to do it with purpose. With intention. He needed a disguise. He started with the basics. A costume, not something flashy, but functional. Lightweight, dark clothing with reinforced seams. A hood, gloves, goggles to hide his face. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to keep his identity secret. He studied parkour and stealth tactics, trained his body and mind until they moved as one. By nightfall, he was ready. His first mission wasn't planned. He heard the cries of a woman being dragged into a van just blocks from his apartment. Instinct took over. He intercepted the vehicle, ripped the back doors off their hinges, and incapacitated the attackers in seconds. The woman sobbed with gratitude, but he vanished before the police arrived. News of a mysterious vigilante spread like wildfire. Local forums lit up with blurry footage, speculation, nicknames. The Phantom, one post called him. Jamie didn't respond, didn't bask in the attention. He just kept going. But every action came with consequences. His friends noticed his absences. At work, he was distant. When he missed his best friend Leo's birthday dinner, the phone calls started. Jamie ignored them all. His double life demanded secrecy. Then came the night he chased a gang leader known for trafficking minors. It should have been simple: disable the guards, gather evidence, alert authorities. But Jamie was overconfident. He stormed in without a plan. A trap. He barely escaped, bleeding and shaken. Back in his apartment, he collapsed. Doubt gnawed at him. Was he really helping? Or was he playing a game he didn't understand? As he stitched his wounds, he remembered something his father used to say: bravery isn't about having no fear, son. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared out of your mind. Jamie clenched his fists. If he was going to do this, it couldn't be half-hearted. He had to be smarter. Stronger. Wiser. Because people were depending on him, even if they didn't know it. Outside, the city pulsed with danger and hope. And Jamie, now masked and resolute, stepped once more into the shadows. Jamie's double life was beginning to take its toll. The physical strain he could handle, he healed faster, recovered quickly, and had stamina for days. But the emotional cost was another matter. His relationships, already frayed, began to unravel. Leo stopped calling. Jamie's boss at the bookstore, Ms. Gaines, gave him wary looks every time he slipped in late or disappeared mid-shift. And his neighbor, Clara, who used to share garden tomatoes and stories about her late husband, now hesitated before saying hello. The distance was intentional. Jamie thought it safer that way. If no one was close to him, no one could get hurt. Or so he believed. Then came the break-in. Jamie returned from a night patrol to find his apartment ransacked. Books shredded, furniture overturned, his makeshift costume missing. A message was scrawled on the wall in red paint, or was it something worse? That read, "We see you, hero." Panic clawed at his chest. Who were they? How had they found him? He spent the next 48 hours in hiding, moving between abandoned buildings, sleeping in short bursts. He kept moving, thinking, planning. Someone was watching him. Someone who wanted to expose, or end, him. Despite the fear, a new resolve emerged. Jamie returned to Clara's apartment under the cover of darkness and tapped on her window. She opened it, startled, but let him in. "I need help," he said. It was the first time in weeks he had let his guard down. Clara, ever practical and sharp despite her age, listened carefully as Jamie explained. She didn't flinch, didn't call him crazy. She just nodded. "I knew something was going on," she said, handing him a cup of tea. "You've got the eyes of someone carrying a secret too big for one heart." Clara helped him find a new safe house, an old maintenance room beneath the apartment building, and set up surveillance cameras. For the first time in a long while, Jamie didn't feel alone. But trust was a two-edged sword. Letting Clara in meant risk. And soon, he learned that consequences were already unfolding. 2 nights later, Clara's window was shattered. Her apartment searched. Jamie arrived too late. She was gone. A note lay on the table, addressed to him. "Stop, or she pays the price." Jamie's hands trembled as he picked it up. The glow in his eyes flared with fury. He had tried to protect others by pushing them away. Then, he tried by bringing someone in. Both paths had led to pain. Now, he stood at a crossroads. The question wasn't whether he would fight. It was how far he was willing to go, and what part of himself he might lose in the battle ahead. Jamie didn't sleep the night Clara was taken. He paced the cold, concrete floor of the safe house, hands clenched, mind spinning. Every moment that passed was a reminder that he had failed to protect the one person who had believed in him without question. The city outside moved on, oblivious to the quiet war brewing in its shadows. He reviewed footage from Clara's apartment, rewound it again and again, watching the masked figures slip through her window like shadows. They were professionals. No hesitation. No noise. They moved with precision. And worst of all, they left no fingerprints, no trail. Jamie knew this wasn't random. Whoever had taken Clara had done their homework. They wanted to draw him out, to test him, to punish him. And they had chosen the one way to make sure he couldn't ignore them. But he couldn't charge in blindly again. The last time he had underestimated his enemy, he'd barely survived. This time, someone else's life was on the line. He needed help. It took every ounce of humility he had to call Leo. The phone rang longer than Jamie expected before a tired, cautious voice answered. "Jamie? It's me. I know I don't deserve your trust. But I need you. Clara's been taken." A pause. Then Leo's voice hardened with concern. "Where are you?" When Leo arrived, there were no lectures, no accusations, just a silent understanding. The bond they'd shared for years hadn't been destroyed, only buried. Leo had contacts in city tech circles, access to surveillance feeds, and more importantly, a level head. Together, they began piecing together what little they had. Bits of audio. Glimpses of license plates. Patterns of movement. They discovered a name, Deadless. A faceless figure rumored to run an underground network that trafficked in blackmail, corruption, and manipulation. No one had seen him. No one dared speak his name aloud. And now, Jamie had his attention. The closer they got, the more Jamie felt the line blur between justice and revenge. He caught himself pushing too hard, becoming more aggressive during night patrols. Leo noticed it too. "You're not just trying to save Clara," he said one night. "You're trying to punish yourself." Jamie didn't deny it. Every life he had touched, directly or indirectly, now felt like a burden he couldn't carry. He wasn't a savior. He was a storm, and the people near him got swept away. But Leo wasn't finished. "You can't do this alone. And you don't have to." That night, they formulated a plan. A way to draw Deadless out. It was risky, dangerous, but it was all they had. Jamie stared at the city from the rooftop of an old warehouse. The wind was sharp against his face, the lights below like stars scattered across the ground. Somewhere in that maze of streets, Clara was waiting. Somewhere, Deadless watched. And Jamie? He was done running. He would face what was coming. Not because he was fearless, but because he was needed. The battle ahead would test everything he believed. And this time, he wouldn't face it alone. The warehouse was quiet in the early hours of the morning, cloaked in fog and the distant hum of a restless city. Jamie stood still, dressed in his patched and armored suit, a sleek silhouette against the steel horizon. Leo was beside him, monitoring their surveillance setup from a van parked around the corner. Everything had led to this moment. They had baited the trap perfectly, leaked false intel about a data cache from a secret government project stored at the warehouse. Enough to draw Deadless's agents out, enough to force a confrontation. Jamie's nerves tingled not with fear, but anticipation. He heard the first sound, a low thrum of an engine. Then another. 4 black SUVs rolled up silently. Men in tactical gear emerged with precision. They weren't ordinary thugs. These were trained, methodical. Jamie stepped back into the shadows, heart steady. Eyes on target, Leo's voice came through his earpiece. "They're spreading out." Jamie moved. In a blur, he disabled the first team, disarming and incapacitating them with swift strikes. He dodged bullets, predicting their movements with eerie precision. But they kept coming, wave after wave. For each man he brought down, 2 more flanked him. They were hurting him, forcing him toward the center. Then he saw her. Clara, bound and conscious, was dragged into view. She looked bruised but defiant, her eyes locking onto Jamie's. A warning. A plea. And beside her, a man stepped into the light. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes like cold glass. Deadless. "You're impressive," the villain said calmly. "But you've forgotten the most important rule of power, it always comes with a price." Jamie launched forward, faster than thought. But Deadless was ready. He triggered a device, and Jamie collapsed mid-stride. His limbs felt like fire, nerves burning. A sonic pulse. Leo's warning blared in his ear, but it was too late. "You're not a god," Deadless continued. "You're a scared boy with too much power and no leash." Jamie gritted his teeth, forced himself upright. "Maybe. But I don't need to be a god to stop you." He focused inward, blocking out the pain, drawing on every ounce of strength he had honed over weeks of isolation, training, and belief. With a roar, he surged forward, smashing through the device's frequency field. The shockwave sent soldiers flying. Clara dropped to the ground, and Jamie caught her just in time. She smiled weakly. "Took you long enough." Jamie grinned through gritted teeth. "Had to make an entrance." With Clara safe, the tide turned. Leo, remotely disabling enemy comms, guided police to the location. Chaos erupted as law enforcement stormed the warehouse. But Daedalus vanished, slipping away like smoke. Jamie stood in the center of the battleground, bruised and bloodied but upright. Clara at his side, Leo rushing in. The city had no idea what had just happened beneath its skin. But Jamie knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. A war not of fists, but of ideals. And Jamie? He was ready to fight. The days following the warehouse clash were a blur of recovery and reckoning. Jamie stayed mostly off-grid, nursing injuries and reflecting on how close he'd come to losing everything. Clara, though bruised and shaken, recovered quickly and insisted on returning to her life, refusing to let fear dictate her future. Her strength inspired Jamie more than she knew. Leo, ever the strategist, combed through every scrap of data they had gathered during the confrontation. Though Daedalus had escaped, his network had been partially exposed. Several key operatives were arrested, and their testimonies hinted at deeper corruption hidden within the city's institutions. Jamie realized this wasn't just a mission of brawn. It was a war that required patience, wisdom, and alliances. He resumed his work at the bookstore quietly, blending back into the rhythm of normal life. Every shelf he straightened, every book he recommended, grounded him in the humanity he feared he might lose. The city no longer looked the same to him, it shimmered with hidden pain, unseen battles, and untold stories. But it was his city. His responsibility. One evening, Clara visited the bookstore. She handed him a small, neatly wrapped package, a new pair of gloves, reinforced and sleek. "I figured you'd need them," she said with a smile. "For whatever comes next." Jamie nodded, emotion swelling in his chest. "I won't let them hurt anyone else." "You won't have to," Clara said. "Not alone." Later, on the rooftop of his building, Jamie gazed out at the city skyline. The wind rustled his jacket, stars twinkled faintly above the urban glow. Leo joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "We've come a long way," Leo murmured. Jamie took a sip, exhaled slowly. "And we've got further to go." They stood in silence, companions bound not by fate, but by choice. Jamie's powers hadn't made him a hero. His choices had. Every time he stood up, every time he helped someone, every time he chose hope over fear, he redefined what it meant to be extraordinary. And now, he understood, being extraordinary wasn't about having powers. It was about what you did with them. Months passed, and the city's rhythm resumed, but Jamie's world was forever changed. Crime still existed, shadows still stirred, but there was a new undercurrent of hope. People spoke in hushed admiration about the mysterious protector who had appeared, fought back, and then vanished just as suddenly. Jamie didn't need the spotlight. What mattered was the impact. With Leo's help, he built a discreet network of allies, former victims, whistleblowers, tech-savvy idealists, ordinary people who believed in something greater. They gathered in secret, shared information, offered aid. Clara became the group's heart, mentoring those scarred by loss and fear, her courage a quiet beacon. Jamie still wore the mask when needed. He responded to emergencies, stopped what crimes he could, and most importantly, inspired others to stand up for themselves and each other. It wasn't about being invincible, it was about being present. The bookstore remained his sanctuary. Each customer, each conversation reminded him of why he fought. Every child asking for their first comic, every elderly patron searching for comfort in classic tales, these were the people he protected. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single sheet, a map of the city with red marks along the edges, new signs of Daedalus's operations. A message scrawled beneath. Still watching. Still playing. Your move. Jamie folded the paper slowly. The game wasn't over. But now, he knew how to play. Not alone. Not in the dark. But as part of something larger. He stepped out onto the street, the city humming around him. A woman helped a stranger with a flat tire. A young man guided an elderly couple across the road. Small acts of courage, everywhere. Jamie smiled. Extraordinary wasn't about the power to fly or fight. It was about the courage to care, to act, to endure. And in a world full of noise and shadows, he had chosen to be light. Not perfect. Not fearless. But human. And in that, he had found his greatest strength of all.